in the boat. You know, just about a week ago, this was filled with other things. And yet the potential, we could see ahead of time, even though it hadn't happened yet, and we had cleaned it out. But you know what? The other day, I had a friend come over, and he was looking at the clover on the ground. Not on the ground of the dollhouse, but in the grass outside. And when he was looking at the clover, he said, "What's that?" I said, "It's clover." And I was thinking how many years ago, just about where we are right now, I looked down and I found a four-leaf clover. And then I came back and I looked closer and there was a whole patch of four-leaf clover. Well, next time I came out, it was gone. I don't know if a rabbit ate it or if it had only been a dream or what. And for the next 20 years, whenever I'd see clover anywhere on the planet, I'd look. Three-leaf, three-leaf, three-leaf. Couldn't find any four-leaf clovers. Well, just a couple days ago, a friend of mine came by and he said, "So those are clover?" I said, "Yeah, I've been looking for four-leaf clovers for 20 years. And he looked down and he said, "You mean like that one?" And I said, "You're kidding. You just look down and you find it." And I looked and I marked the spot. And sure enough, I dug them up. And so I'm going to show you they do exist. They're not just a legend. Here's a four-leaf clover here. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's starting to get icky, but then I noticed there's one here too. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then there's a couple others. You got to kind of look for a while. But then there's, well, take my word. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a bunch of them in there. So I'm going to grow these so that I know that I'm not just dreaming. Seeing what other people can't see. You know those pictures, those illusion pictures, and you stare at them long enough, and somebody will say, "It may look like an aquarium full of fish, but actually it's the Eiffel Tower," and you're like, "Yeah, right." But actually you stare at it long enough and kind of cross-eyed, and sure enough, it's there. Well, we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. And our idea, asleep in the boat, is our comfort, our rest, and our safe place. Our comfort, our rest, and our safe place is with Jesus. Is it with Jesus, or is it with just us? Let's look at two boat sleepers in the Bible, Jonah and Jesus. Jonah was running from God and headed on a ship west to Tarshish, the opposite direction from where God told Jonah to go, east to Nineveh. Reading from Jonah chapter 1, "Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God. And they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below deck, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. The captain went to him and said, 'How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us, so that we will not perish.' Then 9 verses later, they took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him." Okay, so we can see here that he lay down and fell asleep into a deep sleep, Jonah did, in the boat. And after they threw him overboard, the raging sea grew calm. Let's contrast Jonah with Jesus. Looking in Mark chapter 4, a furious squall came up, that's a storm, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. The waves went above the edge of the boat in the Sea of Galilee and crashed onto the boat itself, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. So Jonah and Jesus. Jonah had been below the deck where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep, and then they threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. Jonah was probably below deck. Jesus was above deck. And there was probably no below deck on the fishing boat. And Jesus said to the waves, "Quiet, be still," or "Peace, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. So the moral of this story is, in the storm, with Jesus, is better than in the sea without him. At least you still have a ship to be in. When trouble comes, rest in Jesus. What about resting in Jesus? Let's look at the passage in chapter 4 of Mark, and we're going to see how we rest in Jesus. Even as Jesus rested in the boat, surrounded by a storm, he could still rest. Likewise, when COVID comes, when you lose your job, when you lose your girlfriend or your boyfriend, we can rest in the storm. In fact, we used to sing a song to the kids in the Philippines. With Jesus in my vessel, I can smile at the storm, smile at the storm, smile at the storm. With Christ in my vessel, I can smile at the storm. And we'll go sailing on. Sailing, I'm sailing home. So we understand that when Jesus is in our boat, then we have nothing to fear. When trouble comes, rest in Jesus' presence. He's there with you. Rest in his power. He had power over the waves. And rest in the promise of his peace. It may not seem peaceful at that time, but he has promised that he will give peace to us as we follow him. When trouble comes, rest in Jesus' presence, his power, and his promise of peace. First of all, his presence. Look in verse 35 of Mark chapter 4. That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side of the lake." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was, in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Now, I am being surrounded by bees, but just like being in the vessel and not having anything to worry about, I'm not going to worry about getting stung. The day of the storm. When Jesus was in the storm with his disciples, this day was a busy day for them. It was already getting towards evening, which is the time that many storms do come, although they come many times a day. Jesus had actually preached 5 sermons that day. The 5th sermon only had 14 words, and these were the words: "Quiet, be still, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" That is his whole sermon. If you want to find 3 points and 6 subpoints, you can look for it. But we also realize that during that day, he not only preached those 5 sermons, he healed many people and did a lot of other stuff. The first of the 5 sermons was in verses 1 through 20, the parable of the sower. And the idea of that one was, are you listening? Grow deep roots in your faith. You remember when the sower cast his seed. In fact, my wife Elvie and our daughter Abby and our son PJ are planting corn in the garden right now, digging up the garden. They're very careful about planting seed, but in the Bible times, the story Jesus was telling, the farmer didn't have enough time to plant each seed separately. Instead, he just had a satchel, and he reached his hand in and he kind of threw the seed, and some of the seed landed in good soil, some landed on rocks. The stuff that landed on the good soil and then really dug its roots deep as it was growing really produced well. The other dried up and died. So the idea here was, are you listening to the word when it comes into your heart, when God speaks to you, sometimes through the words in the Bible, sometimes through a preacher, sometimes through a friend, or sometimes through circumstances. The second message that Jesus preached that day, in verses 21 through 25, a lamp on a stand, how you don't hide it under a bushel when you have a light. Instead, you shine it on the mountain so that everybody can see. Likewise, we need to shine the light of Christ in other people's lives so that they won't be groping in the darkness. Also, the third sermon, in verses 26 through 29, the parable of the growing seed. A farmer plants a seed and it grows. He has faith that it will grow, even though he can't see it down in the soil. And once it grows, it sprouts up and produces fruit. It makes all of his work worthwhile, as long as he is faithful to care for it. And of course, our life needs a lot of care. Once we come to Jesus, that's not the end. He has so many exciting things planned for us. Our life can truly be victorious as we touch many other people's lives with the joy that Jesus has given. The fourth message in verses 30 through 34 was the parable of the mustard seed. I remember a woman gave us a necklace with a little pendant, and the pendant had plastic, and inside the plastic was embedded this itty-bitty seed, smaller than a radish seed, and that was a mustard seed. And it says in that passage that it's a tiny seed, the mustard seed, but has incredible results, grows a giant plant. Don't underestimate God's potential through you. You may think, oh, I'm nobody. Nobody's a nobody when they have Jesus inside. Any nobody is a somebody when you got Jesus. So this fifth sermon, this 14-word sermon, Jesus calms the storm. In essence, the sermon says, it's okay. I'm here. It's okay. I'm here. You know, just a few days ago, my sister Ginger, she's a grandmother, and her granddaughter Kaylin, she was talking to her, having a picnic, and Kaylin said, she's only like 5 years old. She said, we saved a man's life today. And Ginger was like, oh yeah? And when did this happen? And Kaylin said, oh, remember we went on a picnic with our family, and we were in the green grass under the bridge, and when we looked up, we saw a man's body fall off the bridge. Fall off a 100-foot high bridge. And this 51-year-old man had parked his car in the middle of the road of the bridge, and he jumped off the bridge to take his own life. And then he didn't die, but he was all bleeding and so forth, and he didn't really want to drown, so he swam to shore, bleeding. And Ginger's daughter-in-law called 911, and the ambulance came and rushed the man to the hospital and to the psychiatric ward. He couldn't handle being rich during COVID-19. The strain was too much for him. He had anything that a person could ask for, and yet his purpose was gone. More money doesn't do it. More possessions won't do it. It takes Jesus. Once you have Jesus, you don't need anything else. That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Now, the disciples did not know that there was going to be a storm. But they knew one thing. Whatever life throws at them, as long as Jesus is by their side, it's going to be okay. Verse 36 says, they left the crowd behind and brought Jesus along. They went where Jesus suggested they go. Maybe they did know there was a storm coming, but they didn't argue with Jesus. The poor me syndrome that human beings seem to have lately. A person will come and seriously say, I'm sorry, I have ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADD, attention deficit disorder, or CPDD, calcium pyrophosphate deposition disease, or CSD, cat scratch disease. These are real diseases. There's another disease called WD, Wilson disease. It's a genetic disorder in which excess copper builds up in the body, affecting your brain and your liver. It is a disease. COVID is a disease, COVID-19. But every human being doesn't have to be labeled by a disease. You could have 100,000 people with ADHD, and none of them are exactly alike. Labeling them as ADHD is doing them a disservice. Everybody's unique. Thus, these labels only stereotype the symptoms of a person. I should have a Paul Barner syndrome, kind of like the Wilson's disease, in which people can say, oh, I know why Paul acts the way he does. When you really get to know him, you will know that he has mannerisms and skills, and there's nobody like him on the planet. He's got Paul Barner syndrome, and nobody else has that. Some people may have a little bit of that, but not like he does. Very recently, we had a very calamitous situation in the United States. There was a man named George Floyd, and he was murdered. That murder this past week was a terrible thing. And yet, what was also terrible was that many people use this situation to say that African Americans are being persecuted and that police are being unnecessarily brutal. Now, that's not necessarily bad to say that. It's good to bring out this injustice. However, other people justified killing other people as a result of the case. Doesn't make sense, does it? It really doesn't. To do this ignores the great strides that our country has made towards equal rights. The Civil War, the proclamation for emancipation. Think down through biblical history of those who have relieved stressful situations through sacrificial faith. The faith that Abraham had. He could have had a poor me syndrome when God said, I want you to sacrifice your son Isaac. But instead he trusted God. And he saw a ram in the thicket that rescued Isaac. Think about Noah. There, he was in the ark, in the ocean. And he helped you and I. We wouldn't be here now if Noah hadn't built the ark. We can understand that he didn't have a poor me syndrome saying, look at this, I got to build this huge ark. I don't have any power tools. And even that, don't know where to plug them in. Instead, everybody's making fun of him, possibly. And yet he and his three kids, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, they built the ark. Whether there's a ram in the thicket or an ark in the ocean, God has a solution for every situation we can face. Recently, I was listening to the Cathedral Singers online with my dad. And the bass singer quoted this poem. The poem was, God, forgive me when I whine. Today upon a bus, I saw a girl with golden hair. I envied her, she seemed so sweet, and I wished I was as fair. When suddenly she rose to leave, I saw her hobble down the aisle. She had one leg and used a crutch, but as she passed, she gave a smile. Oh God, forgive me when I whine. I have two legs. The world is mine. I stopped to buy some candy. The lad who sold it had such charm. I talked with him. He seemed so glad. If I were late, it'd do no harm. And as I left, he said to me, I thank you. You've been so kind. It's nice to talk with folks like you. You see, he said, I'm blind. Oh God, forgive me when I whine. I have two eyes. The world is mine. Later, while walking down the street, I saw a child with eyes of blue. He stood and watched the others play. He seemed not to know what to do. I stopped a moment, and then I said, why don't you join the others, dear? He looked ahead without a word, and then I knew he couldn't hear. Oh God, forgive me when I whine. I have two ears. The world is mine. With feet to take me where I'd go, with eyes to see the sunset's glow, with ears to hear what I'd know. Oh God, forgive me when I whine. I've been blessed indeed. The world is mine. As we face the world, let us be joyful. And as Jesus' disciples did, and as Noah did, and as Abraham did, enjoy his presence. And forget about jumping off the bridge. When trouble comes, rest in Jesus' presence. When trouble comes, also rest in Jesus' power. Looking at verses 38 and 39, Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, Quiet, be still. Kind of like a puppy dog. Quiet, waves, be still. Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. Jesus knew the formula. Number one, get up. Number 2, rebuke the wind, quiet wind. And number 3, talk to the waves. Be still, waves. When trouble comes, rest in Jesus' power. Did he punch the lights out of that water, those waves? The very same mouth, the very same voice, the very same breath that said, peace, be still, to the waves, quiet waves, also spoke those waves into existence. Let there be light, and there was light. So the waves knew, if I don't quiet down, kind of like when we were growing up, and we'd be upstairs, and Dad and Mom would be downstairs, and it'd be past bedtime, and Dad said, I hear voices. Suddenly there's no more voices. Don't make me come up there. Quiet. That same voice had such power behind it, and a belt as well. When trouble comes, rest in Jesus' power. Are you knocked down for some reason? I think every day we're probably knocked down at least half a dozen times. In fact, sometimes they're in a chain, kind of connected to each other. I mean, one morning I was washing the dishes and I broke a glass and I cut my hand. And then later on I was making cookies or something and salt got in the wound. And then a week later, it started to grow and fester. I was like, this is gross. But you know what? It won't take me. You know what? The peace of God is not a P-I-E-C, just a piece of God. It's the P-E-A-C, the peace that passes understanding that God gives. No matter what the storm provides, God can still say, peace. He's had enough. Be still. Get up if you're knocked down. Jesus was surrounded by the waves. He was soaking wet. He actually probably was really, really wet. This isn't usually brought out, but he was in the stern on a cushion. Only Mark mentions of the 3 that mention this. I think it's Mark, Luke, and John mention the calming of the storm, but only Mark actually mentions him being on a cushion, and he was fast asleep. The waves broke over the boat. So that means it didn't break the boat, but it broke over the boat so that the boat was nearly swamped. Now, in a boat, there's 4 directions. There's the bow and the stern and the port and starboard. The stern is the back part. That's where Jesus was. The back part of the ship or the boat, the entire back of the vessel. It's opposite the bow, which is in the front part. Today, the stern end of the ship is indicated with a white navigational light at night, so you can see where the front and the back of the ship are. The starboard is the right-hand side facing forward. The right-hand side of the boat is called the starboard because it was on the side that the steering board, starboard, steering board, which we now call an oar or a rudder, was mounted. The starboard was old seaman's revision of the words steering board. Since the steering board was mounted on the right side of the boat, that side could not be tied up to the wharf of the dock, or the dock when it's in port. Therefore, the left of the side of the boat is called the port side, because it was a side that was tied to the wharf or the dock when it was in port. Steering board and port side. In the days of the transatlantic steamers, the expensive upper-class tickets sold in Europe would be marked with the acronym P-O-S-H, or POSH. It's the posh cabins, the really one for the nice, expensive people. The acronym POSH became known as the posh cabins. POSH stands for P-O-S-H, port outward, starboard home. This means that on the trip from Europe to America, the ticket holder's cabin would be on the port side of the vessel, and on the homeward leg, it would be on the starboard side. The North Atlantic is a very cold ocean, even in the summer, and these cabins would be on the south sunny side of the steamer. So with Jesus in the boat, whether you are in the bow, the front, or the stern, the back, or the port left side, or the starboard on the right side, you're still in the sunny side. You're still in the posh part of the boat. Jesus was in the back, the stern part of the boat. And the water would have probably gone over the front of the boat. You know, I was in a speedboat once during a storm, And the water, I was dry. I was in the front of the boat, but I was dry because the water was hitting all the people in the back. It went over my head and onto them. Over the heads of the people in the front, in the bow, and soaked Jesus in the back. Still, even though soaking wet, he was fast asleep, almost like he was in a jacuzzi. And his disciples had to wake him up. If he was asleep, why did they ask him whether he cared if they drowned? He didn't seem to care. He was sleeping. Well, he would have drowned too, but when you are in an emergency, you sometimes say things you don't really mean, and he did care. He was teaching them a lesson. You go out of control a little bit when you don't really understand. You're powerless, but Jesus has power. We're never powerless when we have Jesus. There's a saying that says, Jesus and me make a majority. Jesus alone makes a majority. He doesn't need me. Noah and the ark. Abraham and the ram. Jesus and the boat. When trouble comes, rest in Jesus' presence. Rest in his power. And finally, rest in the promise of his peace. Verses 40 and 41. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Now Jesus had asked two questions to the disciples after calming the storm. He asked them, number one, why are you so afraid? And number two, do you still have no faith? He didn't say little faith. He said no faith. Fear sneaks up on you. I have a friend named Dr. Tom DeVol. He's a psychiatrist. And he's a great guy. He's a Christian guy. And he asked me a question. Now, I don't know what it is with psychiatrists, but they just like to make everybody a patient. Just to work examples. So he says, Pastor Paul, if you're standing on the edge of a cliff, are you going to be scared? I said, nope. He said, no. Why not? I said, well, because of the fence right there between me and the edge of the cliff. Dr. Tom's response was, that is incredible. I'm like, why? He said, most people don't see the fence. This is just in your imagination. They only see the cliff and the potential fall and what you'll do. We need to focus on the fence, and the fall won't come unless you lean too hard on the fence. Jesus is our fence. He protects us. We don't have to worry about it. Some people are fearful of another kind of a fence, a fake fence, one that will harm you, one that will fence you in and keep you from your wants and your dreams. And it is not even there. The fence that will be a corral to keep you from your dreams instead of a fence to protect you. In the Philippines, there are many people that have superstitious beliefs. They do in this country, too. Some people don't have a 13th floor or a 13th room or a 13th seat on a plane. But overseas, because of the history of the country, many superstitious beliefs have grown throughout the country. These beliefs have come from the different sayings and beliefs of their ancestors passed down from generation to generation, and they aim to actually prevent danger from happening or to make a person refrain from doing something in particular. Saying, don't go out into the woods late at night because the aswan, the warlocks, are there and they'll attack you. Well, there's no such thing as warlocks and so forth there, but wild animals might get you, so they're just saying that to keep them inside. Or, be careful, Mount Apple is watching you. Wherever you go, watch what you do. Well, that keeps them in line and accountable. These beliefs are part of the culture. They derive beliefs from how customs and traditions explain certain phenomena that are otherwise unexplainable, except through special science. Phenomena, or sometimes just to scare people. Some are practiced primarily because Filipinos believe there's nothing to lose if you comply with the beliefs. Some are just fun ideas that have a tinge of tingly, exciting, tantalizing fear attached to it, like on a bicycle about to ride over a dirt-packed jump and fly through the air. Once I did this on a Huffy bike, and when I landed, boom, the bike broke in two. Very painful. Okay, next time I'll either use a smaller jump or a stronger bike. We can understand that sometimes the fences that are being built are there to protect you. Sometimes they're there to make you scared. We need to understand that with Jesus in the vessel, I can smile at the storm and not really let it get to me. Winnie the Pooh had a good friend, Piglet, his best friend. Winnie the Pooh was a stuffed bear, and Piglet was a stuffed pig, baby pig. Piglet sidled up to Pooh from behind. "Pooh," he whispered. "Yes, Piglet?" "Nothing," said Piglet, taking Pooh's paw. "I just wanted to be sure that you were there. Jesus is there with us all the time. Sometimes, hey, Paul." I said, "What?" "I just wanted to let you know I'm here." And sometimes he doesn't use an audible voice. Sometimes he says, "Hey, look at the sunset. I made that, and it's just for you." See everything as a part of the master plan. As God's children today, supposed to be, you know what? Today I was supposed to be in a race in the Connecticut Ironman 70.3. Swimming 1.2 miles, bicycling 56 miles, and running a half marathon, 13.1 miles. About 8.5 hours it takes me. I was looking forward to that Connecticut race, but because of COVID-19, they had to change it. So I'm going to be in Maine at the end of August instead. Now I'm like, oh man, the race is canceled. But then I'm thinking, you know what? That gives me 3 more months to train. I can bicycle instead of just 2,000 miles before that race in Connecticut. I had 3 more months, so I can go 3,000 miles before the race in Maine and do a lot better on my time. There's a silver lining. Any cloud that comes, if we see that God is in control. You know, Aristotle once said, the antidote for 50 enemies is one friend. We have a friend in Jesus. We don't have to worry about the storms that come across our way. We can fall asleep in the boat like Jesus was, not like Jonah was. Jesus had 2 questions after calming the storm. Why are you afraid? And do you still have such little faith? Today is another important day. Not only the original day of the triathlon, but also it's Pentecost Sunday. It's the annual Christian festival commemorating the descent of the Holy Spirit on the disciples of Jesus after his ascension from earth to heaven on Ascension Day. It always falls on the 7th Sunday after Easter. Now, it actually is a Jewish celebration from the Old Testament. Pentecost Sunday is. But Pentecost means the 50th day, and it's celebrated on Pentecost Sunday, the 50th day of the Easter season, including Easter Sunday, the first day in the counting. Jesus was preparing his disciples for his ascension and also for the power of Pentecost, but first they had to know his peace even in a storm. So when he brought them through this exam, if you will, then he said, you know, you guys flunked. You failed miserably. Where's your faith? But he's not saying, you know what, you get an F, forget it, I'm leaving. He said, we got some work to do. And we can work on this. Kind of like a pretest. And you don't do great in the pretest, you know what to study. He says, your faith, work on it, okay? Because I'm not going to be with you much longer. You know, there's a song that we sing with the kids. I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart. And to stay. Then another verse says, I got the wonderful love of my blessed Redeemer way down in the depths of my heart. Where? But one verse says, I've got the peace that passes understanding. And the world says, where is it? Down in my heart. I have peace down in the depths of my heart. And when things really dig deeply into my heart and try to break it in two, the deeper they cut, the greater Christ shines in my life. Because he's there. Like the little kid who had heart surgery. And he said to the doctor afterwards, so did you see him? And the doctor said, what? He said, you got into my heart. Did you see Jesus there? Jesus is in your heart. Peace, be still. Be still and know that no matter how much the storm may be blowing outside, no matter how many people may be dying, thousands of people dying of COVID, still, we have peace in the storm. We have a garbage disposal in Dad's house, and every once in a while it stops working. So I call my brother over. I said, Bud, it stopped working again. And he jiggles it and does some stuff, and he says, it works now. I said, what did you do? He said, secret. Finally, one day I said, but it's not even humming. He says, you know what? On the very bottom, there's a button. Just push the button. I did. It started working again. I'm like, Christ knows exactly how to calm us. He just touches that part of our heart, and everything works. We don't have to jump off a bridge. Jesus has the power. Why are you so afraid? You still have such little faith. You know, in Michigan, I was listening to one of the church services there in Baptist Church in Detroit, and they had itemized the different phases of COVID. Phase 1, they said you can have 10 people gathered together. Phase 2, 50 people. Phase 3, larger gatherings. And in different states, they have different explanations on what the phases are. But here in New York, they keep backpedaling sometimes. We're on phase 3. Oops, we're down to 1.5 again. What level are we in? Why do they keep changing their minds? Because really, this is a new thing. What if I get COVID? What am I going to do? Lots of questions. Make the storm in our mind. Even in the storm of uncertainty, we can rest in Jesus' peace. He promises that he will get us through. In 2 Kings chapter 6, Elisha is on a parapet of a fort. And his assistant says, Elisha, we are in big trouble now. Look out on the hillside. It looks like the trees are moving. It's incredible. There's thousands of people from the Aramean armies about to attack us and wipe us off the face of the earth. And what did Elisha say? He prayed. And what was the prayer he prayed? This is what he said in 2 Kings chapter 6. Elisha prayed, open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked, and he saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. He was surrounded by the good guys. There was a New York security guard, and a southerner had come in to the store, and he realized, well, because of COVID, you have to be careful who comes in. Do you have any ID? Southerner says, no idea about what? Well, Southerners have a different understanding of the accent. In a nursing home, a politician came to visit a lady, and he said, ma'am, do you know who I am? The lady said, nope, don't. But you know what? If you can't remember who you are, the lady at the front desk, whenever I can't remember my name, she lets me know who I am. Sometimes we feel lost. Sometimes we just can't understand why puzzle pieces don't fit together. We can go to the front desk. God has the big picture. He has the master plan. Once you have Jesus in the boat, you don't have to worry about the storm. Remember Rafi? I looked and I looked and I looked, and I didn't see those 4-leaf clovers. Oh, but he did. He said, you mean like that one? And that one? And that one. And once he opens our eyes, God is sovereign, even during COVID. You know, once I had TIA, transient ischemic attack. It's a warning stroke. It's a mini stroke, they call it. It says, be careful of your life, because you might have a real one, a big one. Sometimes God warns us in our lives. Don't forget that I'm here. Trust in Christ always. Don't lean on your own understanding. Acknowledge him in all your ways, and he will make your paths straight. So it's okay to fall asleep in the boat, in the storm. I'm going to pray for you now. And for believers, I will pray, and for unbelievers as well. Oh, dear Lord, please bless those who know you as their Savior. They already know your presence. Guide them to rest in the promise of your peace, now that your power is in their lives. Guide us, Lord, as Romans 12:12 says, that we should rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, and continue instantly in prayer. Lord, for unbelievers, they don't have a clue. They do not understand because they don't know you. All of these things are meaningless because they've never experienced the joy that you have. They cannot see the protective fence because it's not there. They could fall off the cliff. They're teetering on the edge of your eternity without you. They're a lost soul and about to fall. Guide them to come to you, Lord, to pray, dear Jesus, I'm a sinner. Please wash away my sins by your blood shed on the cross and make me clean. Please make me your child, and I promise to live for you for the rest of my life. In Jesus' name, amen. When trouble comes, rest in Jesus' presence, his power, and the promise of his peace.